We turn now to the United States. Top story we're following. The lights are on at the U.S. Capitol this morning. That is live picture there. But hundreds of thousands of federal workers are home on furlough. Others are working without pay for now. A partial government shutdown is entering its second full day with no end in sight, at least not until after Christmas.
The Senate adjourned on Saturday with no deal on a spending bill to fund the government. President Trump and Democrats, they are fighting over money for his border wall that he wants. Vice President Mike Pence has offered to Democrats come up with $2.5 billion. Democrats' response? No. More from Sarah Westwood.
President Trump is still not signaling what he'd consider in terms of a deal that could get 10 Senate Democrats on board and start the process of reopening the government. But White House officials say the president is not budging from his demand for $5 billion for the border wall, and they say that money has to be used for the construction of a physical barrier along the southern border. They say it can't just be used for border security in general, which is one of several potential options that had been floating around Capitol Hill amid the shutdown talks. But make no mistake, despite that current hardline stance, the president has been all over the map when it comes to the funding fight. First, saying that he would be proud to accept responsibility for a shutdown if it was over money for his border wall. Then, through aides, signaling that he might be willing to entertain a temporary spending deal passed by the Senate that would have kept the government open through February 8th. And finally, by Thursday, rallying House Republicans to pass a funding mechanism that did contain $5 billion for the wall, buckling under pressure from conservative allies on Capitol Hill and in the media to avoid what they described as a surrender on the border wall. Now, the president held a lunch here at the White House on Saturday with Republican lawmakers. No Democrats were in attendance, and those who did attend were mostly conservative allies like Congressman Mark Meadows, Jim Jordan, Senator Lindsey Graham, allies of the president who already agree with him when it comes to the strategy behind the shutdown. And as Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said earlier Saturday, the logjam will persist until the president huddles with Senate Democrats to talk about a potential compromise. But the lack of clarity surrounding what exactly the president might be willing to entertain has caused headaches for some lawmakers who really have no idea what kind of deal the president might support beyond that hardline stance for $5 billion. Vice President Mike Pence is leading negotiations for the White House side. But earlier this week, Pence told lawmakers that the president might be inclined to sign that temporary spending deal, something that turned out not to be true. But heading into Christmas, both sides appear very entrenched. Washington appears poised to enter what could be a lengthy shutdown, the president canceling his plans to travel to West Palm Beach, Florida over the holiday amid the legislative logjam. Sarah Westwood, CNN, the White House.
Sarah, thank you. Now, another high-ranking official in the Trump administration calling it quits over the president's decision to pull troops out of Syria.
His name, Brett McGurk. He was a senior diplomat serving as the president's own representative to the international coalition battling ISIS. A big job.
But here's the thing. On Twitter, Mr. Trump claimed that he did not know his own envoy. Then he belittled McGurk as an Obama holdover on his way out. More now from CNN's Elise Labott.
The U.S. envoy in charge of the fight against ISIS has resigned. Brett McGurk told Secretary Pompeo on Friday night that he would be leaving his post on December 31st. Now, McGurk was expected to leave in February to take up a post at Stanford University, but his decision to leave early came on the heels of President Trump's sudden announcement that he would be withdrawing all troops from Syria. Now, McGurk, just days earlier, was talking to reporters about the new U.S. policy to stay in Syria, not only to defeat the remnants of ISIS, but also to counter Iran. In fact, McGurk was in the region meeting with coalition partners to discuss this policy and was sitting with Iraqi leaders talking about the U.S. commitment to stay in Syria when President Trump tweeted that the U.S. would be withdrawing from Syria. And people familiar with McGurk's thinking say that not only did he feel his credibility was on the line, but also he didn't feel he would be able to defend, let alone execute that policy. McGurk has been the envoy dealing with the 70-plus member coalition to fight ISIS since 2013, first serving as the deputy to John Allen and then taking over as envoy himself. Clearly has done a lot to reduce the presence of ISIS. But as he said, there are still remnants, and he said it would be reckless for the U.S. to withdraw precipitously. I'm also told that the decision by James Mattis, who he was very close to, affected his decision. McGurk saying that he could no longer serve the president in this policy against Syria. Elise Labott, CNN, Washington.
Let's talk more now with Inderjeet Parmar on this. Inderjeet, a professor of international politics at City, University of London, live in our London bureau this hour. Always a pleasure.
Good morning. Thank you.
Let's start with the special envoy in charge of fighting ISIS, resigning his post in protest of President Trump pulling out of Syria. With Brett McGurk following the lead of General James Mattis, what does this mean to this president?
And so his disruptiveness is a disruptiveness aimed at the kind of post-1945 order, which basically you could call liberal hegemony, and he's opposed to it. So to some extent, the way in which he has carried out his decision and the kind of unpredictable way in which he goes about in general in making policy on the hoof, it would appear, is backed by a kind of underlying instinct. President Trump is not very good at coherently articulating a strategy, but I think those who support him in some respects, they do call it strategic restraint. I don't think President Trump necessarily would see it in that way, but I think they do see that liberal hegemony has overstretched American power, and I think his own instinct is to pull back from it. And we know from quite interesting studies by Bob Woodward, for example, that there's been big rows about Afghanistan and about Syria within the White House around this kind of question.
It was also interesting, the tweet from the president indicating that claiming that he does not know McGurk, does not know this person who is so integral in policy with regards to foreign policy. Let's also talk about the big story that is obviously in play, this partial government shutdown. It remains in effect. President Trump remains entrenched, demanding funding for his border wall. Congress has gone home for Christmas and will not reconvene until later in the week. Neither side seems willing to budge. Listen.
No further votes will occur until the President and Senate Democrats have reached an agreement to resolve this. Let me say that again. We push the pause button until the President, from whom we will need a signature, and Senate Democrats, from whom we will need votes, reach an agreement.
President Trump, if you want to open the government, you must abandon the wall. Plain and simple.
And Inderjeet, we know that there is no give here. We know that even half of what the president is requesting, $2.5 billion for this wall, it is being denied. So where do you see things going from here?
Well, President Trump is basically in a lot of political trouble, a lot of political difficulties. He suffered quite a significant defeat in November. He's got investigations galore all around his administration. His entire life, if you like, is under the microscope by someone. His appointees are resigning or they're being dismissed for corruption. And we know that, therefore, there is a kind of big problem. But we also know one other thing, which is that President Trump has got a very large extra-parliamentary mass movement, quite extreme right-wing mass movement. And I think that's what he's responding to. I suspect that he sees a future in that particular movement, and he has a very, very strong relationship with those radio commentators and others that have a kind of a very cohesive relationship with him. And I think that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to now go back to that base and to galvanize it and to try to show that he's fighting against those who would open America's borders to criminals and so on. And so I think that's what he's doing. He's ramping up that particular aspect on the wall, which he was elected on as well.
And you point out those pundits who have indicated, Inderjeet, that if the president does not score, to say, for lack of a better word, on this wall, that it could undermine him when it comes to trying to seek re-election with his base. Inderjeet Parmar, thank you so much for the insight. We'll stay in touch with you.
Thank you.
We continue to track about the search and rescue efforts in Indonesia.
Definitely. Back here in the United States, the other major story in play, the U.S. government remains partially shut down, likely until after the Christmas holiday.
Some Christmas gift, for many of those workers. Senators from both sides went home with no agreement, all because President Trump and the Democrats are fighting over money for his border wall. Mr. Trump has also been making some claims about the wall that fly in the face of the facts. CNN's Victor Blackwell separates the falsehoods from the facts.
A lot of wall has been built. We don't talk about that, but we might as well start because it's being built right now, big sections of wall, and we will continue that. And
That was President Trump during that contentious Oval Office meeting with Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. He's claiming there that the border wall that he promised during the campaign and for the first 2 years of his administration is being built. Now, this is not a new claim. Here's the president just a few months ago at a rally in June.
Well, it's happening. It's not build that wall anymore. It's continue building that wall because we're building it.
Look at this. His supporters have even traded in those build the wall signs for finish the wall signs. So is this true? Has Congress approved funding for the border wall? Well, here are the facts. The week President Trump signed a major funding bill in March, he tweeted, got $1.6 billion to start wall on southern border. He's referring to this section of that huge funding bill. Nearly $1.6 billion for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, procurement, construction, and improvements, paying for 6 projects along the border. Not one of them is a border wall. Look, fencing, 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 planning and design, and technology. No mention of a border wall. In fact, there's no mention of that phrase in the entire law. I checked. And aside from 14 miles of a secondary barrier near San Diego, which is still not a wall, the rest is fencing. Now, if you think we're just playing a game of semantics here, consider this. The border wall prototypes in Southern California, remember those? Congress set aside $20 million to build these 8 samples. These were the finalists. One of them was presumably to become the great border wall that the president promised during the campaign. He first toured them in March, just days before he signed that funding bill into law. So which one is being built? Not one of them. Because the same funding bill that allocated $1.6 billion that the president brags about also says that money can only be spent to build designs deployed the prior year. So no money to build anything new, no new wall designs, not the concrete barrier that candidate Trump promised, certainly not one of the prototypes. I mean, get this, he toured them in March 13th, and then 10 days later, he signed the bill that made it illegal to build them. Bottom line, as the president fights for billions of dollars to finish the concrete border wall that he promised during the campaign, remember that despite his claims, he hasn't received a single dollar to start it.
Victor Blackwell, putting the facts first. Thank you.
A new study shows a daunting amount of abuse endured by women on Twitter. Ahead, we will speak with one of the study's authors about what they've learned.